the blood of Jesus. It's nothing but the blood of Jesus, my Jesus. What a sermon could be preached on the prodigal son and his daddy being a great father. And you know, it is a beautiful story. And in that story, there's so many things that maybe you never thought about, and maybe they've never been brought out. So let's go to the story of the prodigal son, Luke chapter 15. And we'll start with verse 11. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, and who told him that he could go to the fields to feed the pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Now that's the first son. And many things that you could glean from this about success in life. First of all, the younger son thought that he knew everything. He thought he didn't need the father anymore. He thought that he didn't need advice from his mother anymore. And he fell in love with the world. And he thought, boy, if I just had a bunch of money, I could go out in the world and I could have a good time. Let me tell you something. One of the greatest mistakes that I've ever seen a father make financially is to give their children a lot of money. I really believe that. And I've watched through the years as the children that did get some money, before long, had wasted that money on righteous living. And they let the world make fun of them, and the world take away from them what they had. And then they wake up one morning and they're broke, because they left the advice of the father, or the father didn't teach them how to take care of their money. I've seen it happen over and over again, and that's why, you know, I keep Matthew down 15, 20 bucks a week. I don't want him to get to thinking that he's got a lot of money. The love of money is the root of all evil. And this young man went out, and while he had his money, the world was his friend. I took a lady in some time back at the Promised Land. She was about 35, 40 years of age. Her husband had abused her. Her husband had abused their children. And she had taken him finally to court, and they put him in jail. He had abused her and the children so much. And she said, "Oh, I'm so thankful I've got rid of him, and now I can start building a good life. Nobody to beat me, nobody to take advantage of me." And about that time, her mother died and left her $25,000, which was a pretty good sum of money at that time. And she took that $25,000 and she did with it what her husband had done with his money. She got her a young boyfriend, and she left her children. She abandoned them, left them up in North Carolina, and got her a seat at the local bar. And she went through every dime of that money, left, of course, the Promised Land, and didn't give the Promised Land anything. And she went through every dime of that money. And she called me one day and she said, "I need help." And I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "I'm in J. Reuben Long. And if you'll help get me out, I promise you I've learned my lesson." And so we helped to get her out, and she came back to the Promised Land, and while she was there, she done pretty good, and she got a phone call. And while it was going through her mother's estate, she'd got $25,000 more that they hadn't known about. Now, morning after morning, she sat in chapel. She said, "I want to warn you people of what the devil will do to you." And she'd tell her story. How he'd made a fool out of her, how he'd taken everything she had, how that she had abandoned her children. She had one of the greatest testimonies you ever heard. And she said, "If I ever get any more money, I'm going to tell you right now, I've learned my lesson." And the phone rang, and it was a lawyer or someone, and they said, "You've got $25,000 more that we missed when we divided up the estate." She couldn't wait to get to North Carolina. Came back with $25,000 more. And guess what she did? A complete repeat. A complete repeat. And you've watched it happen all your life. Satan can make a fool out of you if your parents haven't raised you, number one, in the Lord, and number two, if you haven't learned responsibility to God. There are no winners when it comes to sinners. About 6 months ago, let me tell you this. About 6 months ago, we took a man in that had retired in New York. And they had run through every dime of his retirement here at Myrtle Beach. Every dime. And then they came to him one day and they wanted more money. His friends did. And he said, I've not got any money. We've spent it all. And they beat him until they thought he was nearly dead and then throwed him in the fire. And they burned him till he had to wear a colostomy. I mean, it was a pitiful, pitiful situation. And we taught him about the Father. And we taught him about serving God. And we taught him that money was not the solution of problems. Mike worked with him, got his disability through. He got a check for $25,000 back pay, $22,000 back pay. Now he'd had nothing. He'd run through everything he had. He was having to wear a colostomy. He couldn't work. He couldn't do anything. Pitiful. He got this back check for $22,000. Do you think that he gave any of that to the Lord? Not a dime. He took another boy that was trying to do right, talked him into going with him. What we got here? And the following night, they went down here to the strip clubs. Within a few days, he was broke again. Nothing. And they called me about 2 weeks ago and they said, we just wanted to tell you that, and I won't mention his name, died last night. Money is not the answer. Now this young boy thought, if I just had money. I had a brother that used to say, no money, no honey, no funny. And he really believed that. He believed if he had a little money, that everything would be all right. But this is an example. Now he's broke. What's he going to do? Well, all of his friends got together and they said, he's broke. Let's all pitch in and help him. How many of you believe that story? We'll buy him another car. We'll get him another house. We'll furnish his house with nice furniture. We'll get him what he needs because he's sick. He's having to wear that colostomy. Let's all just go in together and help him. Joe's Bar took up love offerings for him. Are you listening to me? But that's what Satan had convinced him. That's what Satan had convinced him. This boy said, if I just had some money, I wouldn't have to stay here and hoe corn. I wouldn't have to follow the mule. If I just had some money, I could have me a honey. I could have some funny. He really believed that. They asked the richest man in America at one time. Old Rockefeller, what was his name? Nelson Rockefeller. They said, how much money is it going to take to make you happy? And he said, just a little more. All right. Now, had the father taught him? I think he'd taught him. Did the father love him? Yes. I think the father loved him. I think this story brings out that he loved him very much. But he listened to the lies of Satan. So he called them in. He said, boys, all you want's my money. And he divided his property between them. I've seen more families fall out and never speak to each other again over some loved one that died and left a little money. Never speak to their brother again, to their sister again. I've had them get up and leave the funeral and go home and try to steal things that they knew were valuable out of the house because they wanted to be sure they got their part of the money. Money can't buy back your youth when you're old, a friend when you're lonely, or a love that's grown cold. So he gave it to them. Friends were plentiful. He had money. He had money. And he left and went off for a distant country. And he played Mr. Cool. And he squandered everything he had. I've heard people say, well, if the Lord's going to give me something, I wish he'd give it to me now. I wonder how many people, if God gave you a lot of money, how many people's lives would change. I've seen so many people that when they came into the money, they let the love of God and the service of God cease in their life. So he went off and he spent all his money, and he was out there feeding the hogs, which is something a Jewish person would never want to do, never want to do, never want to do. They didn't want to be even around a hog. And here he was feeding the hogs, and he would have eaten the slop that he was feeding the hogs, and no man would give him anything to eat. And then the cell phone rang. And it was the devil saying, but if you had a little more money, you could have a cell phone that vibrated. All right, a famine come into the whole country. He began to be in need. Now here's a guy had had it all. Now he's in need. Now he's feeding the pigs, and he's hungry, and no one would let him have any of the pig feed. And verse 17 says he finally came to his senses. And he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am, starving to death. They've got all this food. These pigs have got all this food. And I'm starving. I'd eat the food that the pigs is eating, but nobody won't give that to me. He said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get up and go back to my father. And I'm going to say, Father, I have sinned against heaven. I've sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your hired men. Now that's going from the top to the bottom, isn't it? But you know, I see that often in the lives of people. I work with people that have gone from millionaires to people of despair. From millionaires to people of despair. I went to visit a boy that lived just down the road one day. His parents had died. Left him a lot of things. He had more gold than I've ever seen in my life. I mean, tables of gold, bullion. And I'm not talking about a little gold coin with just a little covering of gold over it. He had chunks of gold laying on that table. The wall was lined with expensive antique cuckoo clocks. And he should have looked at them more carefully. Worth thousands of dollars a piece. His mother had collected them through all these years. And they were worth a fortune. He had an antique pickup truck sitting out there worth $30,000, $40,000. And I said, son, don't let people know you've got this. I mean, they'll kill you for $20. You know. And here he had all this spread out in the living room of his house. And I worried about it. Pretty good old boy. About 3 months later, I pulled in out the farm. And he come up to meet me. And I said, honey, what are you doing out here? He said, I'm your new client. Everything was gone. Everything was gone. His house was paid for. It was gone. I said, where did you sell your truck? I drove by there many times and wanted that old truck. He said, it's gone. Everything, the cuckoo clocks were gone. and he was homeless and broke. The world will take everything from you. Don't think there's any winners in the game of sinners. And he stayed there for several months. And of course will never regain what he lost. Now, if his daddy had said, I'm going to give you this, but I'm going to spread it out for years till you can't waste it, or done some kind of a financial thing. But he had just given him all of it. And it ruined his life. So you're not being a good father if you just make your child rich, or if you just give your child everything it wants. You remember that? You may be hurting them more than you're helping. And I think the reason that God don't bless a lot of people more than he does, I believe this, is because he knows if he blessed them, it would destroy them. Some people can't handle it. Some people can't handle it. And if God gave it to them, he knows. He knows who will take care of the blessings and help others and share with others and do good things. And he knows whose life money would ruin. So maybe if God's not blessing you a lot as the Heavenly Father, maybe it's because he knows that you couldn't handle the blessings if you had them. There's a lot in this story, but it's a beautiful story. And if you listen to it, you'll find out that the thing that makes you happy is to have a heart full of love for Jesus Christ. Amen? Let's stand.